Welcome to Currents, a podcast for big ocean women. I am your host, Shannon Russell. Just as a disclaimer or a trigger warning, today we will be discussing a very sensitive topic involving sexual abuse. Our intentions are to bring light into the darkest corners of this horrific injustice. So if this is going to be hard for you to handle, we understand, and we would love for you to join us on our next one. But if not, we have really great speakers today. There are moments in history that leave people unsettled, questions that remain unanswered, justice that seems to not be or to not feel complete. The Epstein case is one of those moments in our time. For many, it represents just one man's actions, but for others, it represents a system that seemed to be failing to all the vulnerable. At the heart of it are real people, real victims whose voices matter, whose pain is very real, whose struggles are very real. And whose dignity deserves to be restored. We may not be able to fix every broken system overnight, but we can decide what kind of culture we want to contribute to. A culture that protects the vulnerable, that believes that truth matters, and that values life, dignity, and accountability in all forms. Healing begins when we refuse to look away and we choose to build something better in its place. Light does not ignore darkness. It takes and overcomes it. Our conversation today is about that cultural shift from injustice to healing. Today, I'd like to introduce you to a couple of our favorite voices amongst many at Big Ocean Women who are working to create that kind of impact in our culture. Our first speaker is Grace Raje. She has a wealth of knowledge, and when it comes to this subject, well, actually, you have a wealth of knowledge in all subjects, but pertaining to this subject, you have a wealth of knowledge on how to build a culture that handles solutions to this very sensitive matter, that take victims of sexual abuse into feeling victimized and into their next stage, which is healing. And the other person that we have on today is our founder and our director, Carolina Allen. She has powerful insights on how to help protect children and to bring light and awareness to our communities and in our home. And we're very grateful to have both of you on here while discussing this important topic. So welcome.
Thanks, Shannon.
Okay, Grace, we really appreciate your courage to talk about these difficult topics pertaining to sexual abuse. I know you have a personal experience that you're going to share with us today, but afterwards, I would love for you to bring up how it has helped you understand the issues of today in a personal way.
Yes, thank you. And I want to share my experience very briefly just to lay a bed of credibility and to help listeners know that this is something I deeply understand and I live every day. So when I was 11 years old, my father's colleague raped me along with his wife, and he recorded the the act and sold it as child pornography. This was a dear brother almost of my dad. My father's in the military and they had been through combat together. They had been through a lot. And so this is something that of course my parents were so vigilant about no sleepovers. Like they were so on top of it. I did martial arts consistently from the time I want to say at least 8 or 9 up until I graduated high school. And my parents always taught me to be strong and dangerous for those who would choose to abuse me. This was seriously one of the only times we ever slept over, and it happened. The unthinkable happened. So I was there for 4 nights at his house, and the memories are blurry, and I get pieces here and there, but he eventually was convicted. He went to prison for a short amount of time, and through legal loopholes, his wife I've read the court case 1,000 times, I think. His wife said that the police, when they came in to confiscate the device that he was harboring, they found thousands of images and videos of kids. And when they came in, she said that the police officers had intimidated her, and so they were actually able to shorten his sentence, and he was able to get his charges dropped. So, due to these legal loopholes that really had nothing to do with him and his offense. And so, this has been on my mind as Big Ocean Women. We presented at the Commission of the Status of Women this last year at the United Nations. It's an annual conference that the UN hosts. And each year they have a different theme. And this year's theme was about justice and justice systems. And of course, this is the time of my life when I felt the most unjust. And it is a small reflection of what's happening with the Epstein files, but it's the same system. It's the same system that allows my abuser to walk free, that is allowing all of the men and women in the Epstein files to also not be seeing accountability. So this is something I'm passionate about.
Thank you, Grace. Can you go ahead and start with some? I know CSW had a presentation. If you would like to share some of your slides, I know that you prepared some slides for that, and that were really helpful tools on kind of how to help victims and help also protect those from becoming victims. And first, before you start that, when I made that claim and to help protect from becoming victims, at no point at all do I want anyone to walk away from listening to this podcast to say, well, I was a victim. I must have done something and that could have prevented this. That is not what I am meaning. I'm saying to bring awareness that can hopefully help protect in the future.
Yes, 100%, 100%, I agree. Okay, so for those of you listening without a visual representation, I'm going to try to explain some of my slides, but really I would recommend going to the YouTube video so you can see I've made some graphs and things like that to explain my message, and so I'd recommend going there. So mainly my message is twofold. So the first message that I want all listeners to understand after hearing this is that through strong families, it is possible to create a world where sexual violence is not simply punished, but actually unthinkable. As we're talking about solutions, I'm seeing the media completely saturated with talking about Epstein, and nobody in my scope that I've seen, nobody's talking about the idea that abuse isn't an inherent aspect of human nature. It's not. So I'm going to go into that. And then number two is that when justice is not met, healing is still possible and healing is worth it. So attending CSW, we listen to a lot of events, and a lot of people are calling upon governments to refine their justice systems. And at Big Ocean Women, we think that's great. We think that needs to be done. But we also work with thousands of women across the world, and we realize that this is not realistic to create healing right now. The vast majority of the time, justice through the justice system will not be met. And, like, in my experience, it was not met. However, even if somebody, your abuser, is convicted and they live the rest of their life in prison, there's still a level of healing that needs to be done on an individual level, and that's the most liberating aspect. And so we want to send a message to our women and to anybody listening that healing is possible and it's worth it. It's worth it to heal. Life is worth living. The so many kids who had something happen to them, like what happened to me, don't make it to my age. And I have struggled with that as well. I've struggled wondering if it was worth it to work through something that for the rest of my life I'll have to work through. I'll have to untangle all the trauma for the rest of my life. But I've learned that my life is worth living, regardless. So those are the main two things.
Grace, can I ask you really quick,
Go ahead.
where did that come from? Where did that drive and desire to say to yourself, it's still worth it? I'm still worth it. I mean, I think that's a loaded question. Like, there's just probably a lot that goes into that, but I'm just thinking of anyone that's listening out there. What's a tiny kernel of hope that they can take, you know? where maybe they're on the fence and they're like, I don't know if it's worth it. The pain is too hard. It's too painful. I don't know
Mhm.
how to move through. Do you feel like, is that what you're talking about with family? That the family is that a healthy family? Because, and I guess we have to talk a little bit about a lot of harm and trauma comes from families that are not functional or that have this perpetuated generational illness, right, towards children. But what we're talking about is strong, healthy, not perfect families, but just mentally stable families where the the best interests of the children are really at their heart and they're working towards that. Doesn't mean you're perfect, but would you say that family is like kind of kept you anchored, or what do you think?
100%. Yeah. It is family. It's also just strong connections in general.
Mhm.
Um, which I think the best place for that is the family, but also strong friendships, strong sisterhood with my best friends. I genuinely believe that this is I wasn't prepared to talk about this.
I'm sorry, it just came up and I thought I would ask.
I genuinely believe that the purpose of life is strong connections and
Hmm.
like relationships. That's like the one thing that I believe we can take with us. As a person of faith, I do think there's something after this life. And I think that's kind of like the one thing paired with wisdom alone that we're able to take with us. And I think that's the whole meaning of life. I think that's the whole purpose. Like I think that's why we're here. And so I've learned to like center my definition of success, not based off of like what how the world defines success, but off of like how are my relationships doing? You know, how fulfilling are these? So that is one thing that's helped me. It's also just a lot of grit.
Yeah.
So yeah, well, yeah, I do. I feel a wave of courage. So I'm gonna share this. So I've been hospitalized twice for suicide attempts. So this is something that has affected me since the abuse. So
Mhm.
what happened is after the abuse, and this is very common, I've learned recently, that my brain at the time, I was 11, said, you know, we can't handle this. So it shoved it down into my body. And and so I came home from that, you know, sleepover, and immediately I started having these really vivid, horrible nightmares every single night of somebody abusing me. But I didn't necessarily remember being abused. And I got really sick. And in the years coming, I felt this huge shift in identity, but I was too little to really understand what had happened. So I grew up going by Emma. And after my abuse, I just felt this urge I needed to go by Grace, my middle name. My first name's Emerin. I went by Emma. I cut my hair. I everything about like my favorite color change, and I listened to new music, and that's normal around this pubescent kind of time for kids, but for me it was very like overnight and sudden. And a response that my parents noticed, they got me in therapy right away. Well, you know, after a few months, and then with the conviction of my abuser, we put two and two together. But it wasn't until late into my teenage years that my memory started coming back. And so that entire time I still have nightmares every single night to this day. And but during the beginning of it, it was like the nightmares were vivid and difficult to differentiate reality and the nightmares, and I was terrified of sleeping, so I would go days without sleeping all the way from the ages of 11 until 17. And I got really sick. Organ failure, chronic illness. Your body needs sleep. Luckily, that's right around the time that my parents pulled me out of public school. I started doing homeschooling. I would have failed if I was in public school anyway. Um, and since then, like even into my late teenage years, I've struggled to keep a job because I have to work online. I still have what I call like crash days where I'll still, you know, stay awake for a few days and then crash and sleep like 20 hours. And then I'll stay up for a few more days. So it's difficult to have a conventional job. I go to school online. All of these things have been difficult, and I'm sharing this to explain that abuse affects every aspect of your life. It affects my health, it affects my education, it affects how I'm able to socialize. I was experiencing so much PTSD in such an acute way that I was just having panic attacks all the time, dissociative episodes, thinking I was 11 and whatever. And I was so medicated that I couldn't have a driver's license. When everybody else turned 16 and got driver's licenses, I couldn't. It wasn't safe for me. I was so heavily medicated. So it just harbors a lot of shame to feel like you're different from everybody else. And I would have never shared these details a few years ago, but as I've spoken to more survivors, specifically Kara Baldry, who was on our CSW presentation, she and I sat down together before we presented, and she shared her healing journey, and it was so similar to my healing journey, and my abuse was not nearly as like shocking and as intense as hers, I would say, but it just goes to show that it affects every single aspect of your life. So your question about like what's worth it, what was worth it for me was learning to accept that this is just how my life is now and not try to fight against it. For years, like my family spent thousands and thousands of dollars going to doctors trying to fix me this or that. We tried everything in the book. I mean, like truly everything. And I came to, and I'm grateful we did that. I am, but we came to a level of just acceptance of like, instead of figuring out how can I sleep every night, like how can I build my life around not necessarily sleeping every night? How can, and luckily the pandemic hit and then everybody was online and I was like, you guys are catching up to me because I've already been doing this. So there's a level of acceptance there. And then with acceptance, there's a level of vulnerability and connection that I'm able to have with the people around me and my social sphere, my husband, my sisters, my best friends, my family, all have just come to accept, oh, if Grace doesn't answer her phone, she's probably having a crash day. And, Grace just isn't able to do all the things that you would typically expect somebody to do. And that's okay. And they have grace for me and they love me where I'm at. And I'm very, very lucky to have that. Those connections have been what have kept me going. Okay, I think I overshared, but I think that also answered your
It's all
question.
really good stuff,
Yeah.
Grace. That's great.
I don't
I
think you overshared
I
at all.
think
I
it's
think your
important.
story will
Thank
be
you.
very
Yeah,
resonating for others.
thank you. Yes, if I had heard somebody say this 5 years ago, it would have totally changed my healing journey. Like, I had never heard of anybody else with memory suppression. I never heard that people with sexual abuse oftentimes have chronic illness. I've since
Mhm.
gone to, like, retreats for women who have been through childhood sexual abuse. Every single person there had chronic illness. It's
Mhm.
so common. If I had known this, I would be so much further in my healing. So I'm sharing this terrified and still sharing it anyway because I really think somebody listening is going to say, that's my experience. Maybe something happened to me.
Mhm.
Maybe it's okay.
One of the things that bothers me the most that's a part of our culture is, and specifically like around extreme cases of sexual violence and deviancy perpetuated on a child, is that there's just such a lack of information and of people being informed regarding like how the brain copes with it. And so people are like, well, why don't we have evidence, and why aren't we catching these people? And it's, well, when you do this to a child, the child literally in an act of survival, the brain compartmentalizes that trauma far, far, far deep into the memory, and it rarely comes up until that child feels safe enough in their body, like they can protect themselves. And then you'll have a surge of these memories that are connected to your body. So you'll have these very visceral, bodily felt emotional things and flashes and nightmares and things that will just come up kind of in a big purging of all of this stuff that's been built up over time. And it doesn't happen for years after, in which case, judicially and legally, a lot of times the statute of limitations is passed and you can't go back and prosecute and share that evidence. And then the crappy thing, though, is that it's a double whammy. Like it's a re injury, perhaps even worse, from a lot of my survivor friends, is when their stories are totally minimized and just people think that they're just making stuff up or trying to stir the pot or trying to just, you know, all of the doubt about the abuse gets put back on them just because they're like, well, where's the evidence? But people just don't realize the psychological of like the just the biological and psychological reality of what happens when abuse is thrown upon a child, right? And so that to me is one of the things that as a society we need to be more educated on that. And you don't re-injure a victim. Like nobody is electing, nobody's making this up and wanting attention or, have these debilitating, life-altering challenges for the rest of their life. They're not making it up. Nobody's wanting to do this, right? And that really infuriates me when people come at it from this very logical, like, well, these children need to come forward. I'm like, you have no idea how human minds cope with this level stuff, right?
Yes, and truthfully, like nobody would be more thrilled to learn that I was making all this up than me. Like
Mm-hmm.
nobody. I've struggled with that because it wasn't like I remembered right away. Which I want to say, like I've had a level of grief processing this because maybe my abuser could have been put in prison forever if I had remembered. And I felt angry towards my younger self. Like, why didn't you just remember? Like, why were you not capable of handling this? And I felt angry. Like, I could have solved the issue better, you know? But then I also have to have a level of grace, poetically, because that's my name for myself. I have to keep reminding myself that I think that's why my mom chose that name for me, but that if I had remembered, if I had all the memories right away, I probably wouldn't be here.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's just, like, how does an 11-year-old body harbor that much graphic detail? Like, I just,
Yeah.
like, I was already suicidal. I was already struggling. Like, with the memories, there's just, I'm just so grateful for my brain. It was a brilliant tactic. It was a brilliant
Mm-hmm.
strategy that our
Mm-hmm.
little brains just know how to do this. And I think that you're right, Carol, that if people were to understand that, it wouldn't be seen as a lack of evidence.
Mm-hmm.
Through the years, I have struggled with the am I making it up? I've Googled, like, is this like memory suppression thing real? And it's debated among scientists. It is, and that's difficult for me because I really go back and forth about because also I want to say when I'm saying I have memories, it's not like a regular memory and it's also not like a feeling of a dream like in movies. It's very much like Carolina said, it's in your body. Like my first memory was feeling the scratchy carpet on my left cheek here. But it was like a very physical kind of sensation which I can say proudly now after speaking to so many survivors and they have the same experience, which is why telling your story is so important because it's so validating. So it's a different kind of physiological response. Where was I going with this? Oh yeah. But I've always struggled with like maybe I'm making this up for attention. I was a middle child. Maybe I just need more love. Maybe I need more attention. But it's
Grace,
easier.
I've heard this from so
Yeah.
many friends who are
Mhm.
survivors and listen to many stories
Right.
that they all are saying the same thing.
The
Number
same
one,
thing.
I would be the most thrilled person
Uh-huh.
to discover that this is not true. I
And
want
can I
it to
add
be made
something
up.
here?
Yes, go.
It's just that, like, there's a part of my brain that is white knuckling hanging on to you are making this up because that would be so much easier to accept than that this thing actually happened to you.
Mm-hmm.
So there's this, like, I think it's Aristotle who talks about, like, the ninth man who's, like, always the naysayer. Like, I don't know that that's ever gonna go away. I'm desperately looking for evidence that I am making this up all the time, even though my body knows, my mind knows, my spirit knows, all the people around me know, all the evidence is there. Like, I want it to be true so bad that I'm just making this up. Because
Mm-hmm.
otherwise, you have to accept this is the world
Mm-hmm.
this is how people are. This is
Mm-hmm.
real. And there's such a level of grief to that. I think I'll be
Right.
grieving that the safety of children,
Hmm.
right? Like the rest of my life. So I
Yeah.
sorry, continue. Go ahead.
No, I think that that's brilliant. I think though that as a society, I keep wanting to this is the message I want to share today. So it might just be good to bring it up right now and then maybe
Mhm.
we can touch back on it again. If there's anything I want to share today, the message is that it's not the survivor's responsibility to convince the world that this happened. It's our responsibility for those who have had the privilege of never experiencing this to listen to survivors, to connect dots, to look at the research, to educate ourselves, and project the burden of figuring this out onto the perpetrators. So what happens a lot of times in society is, and that this is something I desperately want to change, and I'm doing all I can within my power to live it. So a lot of times as adults, we have a tendency to, as the driver of how we interact with other adults, is that you want to give every adult the benefit of the doubt and you put the protection of children in the back seat. And that's wrong. It needs to be the other way around. The protection of children has to be at the forefront of how we engage in the world. And, our diplomacy and not hurting other adults' feelings has to take the back seat. As adults, we just have to be big people about it. And if somebody thinks that the way that I'm interacting with a child is inappropriate, I want them, because I'm a good thinking adult and the protection of children are at the driver's seat, I would appreciate them telling me and saying, hey, I find that really inappropriate. And I wouldn't take offense to that. I would say, oh, I too, my priority is protecting children. Thank you for calling that out. I appreciate that. But what happens is, because we're so, for whatever reason, dead set on not hurting other people's feelings, children are totally vulnerable and they don't have enough adults putting them as a top priority. So in my life, for example, there have been some relationships kind of burned, possibly with extended family members here and there, because my daughters, for example, I have four daughters, and they've come to me and they've said, hey, I'm a little uncomfortable about X, Y, and Z family member or whatever. And I listen to that and I approach the person. They've been offended at me. They've said, hey, you need to apologize. You're insinuating this, that, or the other. And I'd say, no, I'm listening to my daughters. I'm sorry. And I don't owe you anything. Just because you're a family member, just because you're a friend, doesn't give you access to my kids, especially if they're uncomfortable. Sorry. And so that my protection of my kids or other kids anywhere in the vicinity, if I see somebody acting weird, I actually have been known many times to approach the person and say, "Hey, like the way that you're behaving towards that child, it seems like you're really honing in on that kid and that those are signs of grooming. Did you know that?" And people are like, "What? How could you say that?" And I'm like, "No, I've read up on it and the way that you're behaving is really strange to me and you need to be careful." And I've actually gone to the child and said, hey, just so you know, these are signs of grooming. And I've educated right there and there in front of people. I don't care because that's not the driver. Other people's feelings are not how I'm showing up in the world. It's the protection of children. And so I would like to see more and more and more people behaving that way, because then what it does is it puts the burden on the predator. So then they have to keep themselves in check. And as a society, we let way too many things pass and slide. You know what I mean?
And I'd
So I
like
just
to
wanted to
add,
share that.
Carol, is that while you were on that topic, before we get back to Grace real quick, children isn't just 3, 4, 2, 5, 6, 7. Teenagers are children. And I
Hmm.
think we need to make that very clear. And I know that there are those who think teenagers have much more control or have the ability to say no or whatever it is that people make excuses for with these predators. Teenagers are also children.
Thank you. Yeah.
Very true. And I have seen with the Epstein files, I've seen people justifying they were 15, not 8, right?
Mhm.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's so sickening as a survivor. It's so
Mhm.
disheartening to try to process my grief and my abuse and everything and then watch my nation, my culture sit and justify this over and over. Like it's the most disheartening thing. It makes me feel like it makes me feel like I shouldn't speak up because nobody's going to believe me and they're going to say you were 11, not 2. You know, like you should have known, you
Mhm.
should have seen it. Carolina has such good points about putting the weight of it on the abuser or even on the person who's just not educated enough to know that these are threatening things.
Mhm. I think that I'm happy to call out even parents that are way too trusting of other people, and they just give every adult the benefit of the doubt, even when their child is silently screaming at them, please protect me. And we have got, especially as mothers, and this is the hard thing too that I want to touch on if possible, is that a lot of times a cycle of abuse, if let's say I was abused and made to feel completely alone and isolated, and that, my mother before me didn't listen to me, the likelihood of me doing that and perpetuating that to my daughter and not being there for her and seeing how somebody is preying upon her through me is just, it goes hand in hand. So that generational abuse just gets, perpetuated in time. And I need more moms to do that healing so that they can be that buffer for their children. And when you do the healing, then you start to see things in a different light and you start feeling empowered that you too can stop. And that perhaps this guy that's interested in me isn't actually interested in me. He's trying to get free access to my kids through me. And you're able to kind of make more educated and wise choices. And it doesn't become about you, it becomes your life, it becomes about your children. And I think that unhealed adults are just, they live life selfishly. I'm sorry to say that. And I'm, maybe a lot of people are going to be upset at me for this, but we're living in a culture that is just feeding selfishness in parents. And I'm going to call it out, and mostly in mothers today. I think that men throughout history have been the selfish parent, and now I think moms are just fed up. But we don't have the luxury of being selfish. We have to put our own needs on the back burner, even if they're romantic needs. If you're not healed and you can't see people for who they are, put that romantic relationship on the back burner over in prioritizing the safety of your children. Because if you're not healed, you're going to be a magnet for perpetual abuse to be, for other abusers to leech onto you, tell you everything you want to hear just to get access to your kids. Like this happens over and over and over again. The more that I've researched this, the more it's just a very clear pattern. If you're not a healed woman and this has happened to you in your past, the chances of it happening to your child are just exponentially high.
Yes. I also want to well, yeah, that's kind of like the whole point of my presentation actually is that like healed women are terrifying for abusers, terrifying for abusive systems. Like, I genuinely believe there's nothing more powerful in disrupting abusive systems than healed mothers
Yeah.
who, and I also, healing is beyond just like your own sexual healing, but also just all sorts of like, like people pleasing, like Caroline is talking about. That needs to be healed, right? Like learning to trust your own internal compass. That's something a lot of women need to work on. I also want to talk about sex education in the home specifically. I think that a lot of parents, I've personally heard this phrase, like, I don't want to ruin their innocence. I don't want to talk to them about their bodies and what sex looks like, what grooming looks like, what abuse could be, because I don't want to ruin their innocence. And my response is, it really ruins your innocence to be abused, right? So I think that if kids had a greater vocabulary to articulate what they're experiencing, what they're seeing, I think that we could prevent abuse from happening better.
I think too, Grace, sometimes we really focus on like the correct anatomical name for parts and different things like that. But I think that the way that I've prepared my own family, and I'm just going to share what we've done, is that I've taught them to hone in on when something feels icky. Because somebody could be talking to you about basketball or about Pokemon cards, and there's something about how they're doing it that makes you feel icky, and they're not even touching you. They're not even getting physical with you. Because we have to nip it in the bud. We have to start the recognition in the grooming process far before it becomes like a one-on-one opportunity for the predator. And so listening to your kids, first of all, educating them on what feels natural and good, like your gut, your spirit talks to you, and so you feel unthreatened by somebody. But the minute that it could be a very casual situation, but there's something about that person that makes you feel icky, listen to that and tell me, and I will do something about it. I don't ever want you to be in a situation where you feel icky, and that ickiness is coupled with feeling unsafe. And you don't have to tell people about molestation or them touching you and your genitals and your vagina and your penis and this and that and that. So some parents, they've done it in a different way. And I still preserve the kid language, up until a certain point, and then I move on into the more anatomically correct language, just because that feels good for me as a mom. But from the very beginning, I teach kids about really tuning in to their feeling of that feels off. I don't like that. And for them to tell me right away. And here's the thing, I will do something about it. If you don't like that person, they're not going to come back to the house. I'm sorry. And I don't care who you are. It could be my dad, it could be my grandfather, it could be, my brother. I don't care, because the protection of my kids, that's what I was put on the earth to do. That's my first commitment. And so the minute that a kid trusts you, the more they're going to be really listening into those things. And then the conversation will start. Well, what is it about them? Did they say something? And so then they start to articulate what exactly it is that makes them feel uncomfortable. And to be honest, somebody could not have molested anybody that's a child. But if they're watching child pornography and they're getting aroused at the bodies of little kids, I don't want you near my kid. Like, you have got to figure that crap out for yourself. And the problem is that we're living in, I think Utah's like a hub for child pornography consumption, right? And I don't want to facilitate this environment for people by exposing my child. Like, you categorically will lose access. And if more and more parents did that, hopefully it would get people into to heal themselves from whatever it is that they've been exposed to in their. They've got to do that work, right? And the problem is that as a society, we just are too nice. We're way too nice to people. And we don't listen to children enough. And that's got to stop. So,
Thank you, Carol.
Okay, are we ready to get into the solutions part of it? Okay.
Let's do it.
Yes, you guys have done a great job at helping me articulate the issue. Please excuse my voice as it's sore and I'm a little stuffy. Okay, so scrolling through. Okay, so, and Carolina touched on this, but we talk about how families are the solution. We also want to acknowledge that the vast majority of the time, abuse is happening within families. It's the uncle, the neighbor, the grandpa, right? And so we want to put maybe a disclaimer, I don't know if that's the right phrase here, but just that we believe in good, strong, healthy families. And even though families are the vast majority of the time harboring abuse and sometimes even the protectors of abusers, we still, despite that, we still believe that families are central to the purging of sexual violence. Like, we recognize that, and as a survivor and as people who have been working with helping to create strong families through the work of Big Ocean Women, like, we still recognize that it's worth it. It's worth it to still depend on the family. Okay, so I mentioned before that the media seems to be saturated with the question, how did Epstein and his fellow abusers get away with it? So we often talk about the blackmail, the corruption, the lack of justice, but I have noticed that there's this huge avoidance about why does abuse happen in the first place? Like, it's like we're all just assuming abuse is inherent and inevitable. And let's see, sorry, so just oh, I want to say that getting to the why, understanding why abuse happens is the best thing we can do to avoid victim blaming, which we talked about earlier, and pushing the notion that abuse is an inherent aspect of human life. So, myths include the idea that sexual abuse is simply human biology or that testosterone plays a part. These ideas have been debunked many times. Men with higher levels of testosterone do not abuse women at higher rates. We even have people who take testosterone as like a transitionatory medicine, they don't just start abusing people. Like testosterone does not have any correlation with abuse. So this has been debunked. Ruth Whitman, an author and journalist, writes that evidence suggests that it is not innate aggression that makes men violent, but the internalized belief that they fall short of society's perceived standards for masculinity. Psychologists call this phenomenon masculine discrepancy stress, and research shows that the more acutely a man suffers from this, the more likely he is to commit almost every type of violence. This includes sexual assault, intimate partner violence, and assault with a weapon. So, this shows us that sexual abuse is not motivated by sexual desires. It's not motivated by your sexual orientation, right? We don't even need to like address the whole MAPS thing that's been going on, but like let's just push that away right now. It's not about your sexual orientation. It is about one thing, and that is control. Abuse is motivated by a compulsion to assert control, power, or control over others, paired with, I would add, the justification that victims are less deserving. And this is done through dehumanization, which is often done to kids, dehumanization. So that's kind of the root of it. And the next argument I hear when I express this is that we hear this not all men argument. And this is interesting to me because since abuse is motivated by a desire to control others, no one is actually immune from being an abuser. And this is not necessarily just through sexual abuse, but this is through manipulation. Like anybody is capable of doing this. You don't have to have the right genetics or the right hormone levels to become an abuser. Anybody is capable. So there's this binary idea that there are good men and bad men. And this removes the accountability that we all have regardless of social class or gender to do better and be better. When we say, "Well, I'm not a bad guy, I'm a good guy," it removes this level of like, how can you do better? How can you be better, right? Like the bad guys do that. Not us, not the good guys. We don't have to think about it, we don't have to talk about it. Okay, so I just want to say that every person I know has contributed to rape culture in one way or another, myself included. So there is this graph, and so this is what I call the rape culture pyramid, and this explains rape culture. When people ask me, what does that phrase even mean? So the top of it is victimization. So this is including phrases like boys will be boys, this is unwanted touch, this is disclosure of private details, this is locker room talk and authority abuse, rape jokes. These are sexist mindsets, these are non consensual photography, victim blaming, gaslighting, and gossip of private events. So, just at that first level, I've gossiped about private events, I've done some victim blaming. First in myself, right? There's so much internalized rape culture, I think, with survivors. There's so much detangling we have to do. Um, there's been all sorts of things. Actually, talking about rape culture, just in the last 7 days, I have found at least 4 examples of rape culture in my life. I was out with some friends. Somebody said a rape joke. It was disgusting. I'm not going to repeat it. I bravely said, I wish I had said something so much sharper, but I always like freeze up when people make rape jokes. So I just said, that's an insensitive thing to say. The man turned to me and said, maybe you're just too sensitive then, right? This happens all the time. Later, just a few days later, I was out with my husband and some friends that we have, and they were talking about how a coworker of my husband and this other guy, he, ooh, this is kind of dark, but I mean, it's not like we haven't already been dark with this episode. He committed suicide because he attempted to rape a fellow coworker and he was caught. And as the gentlemen at the table were discussing, they were like, he was such a good guy, though. Like, this is shocking to us. And the other wife at the table said, a good guy wouldn't do something like this. Stop calling him a good guy. You know? And they're like, all these men are like trying to like come to terms with like, how is it that we knew this guy and he did something so horrible? Because there are signs. He wasn't, it's not that binary. It's not that simple. Okay. So that's at the basic level. The next level is degradation. So this looks like catcalls, pressuring for nudes. My best friend had this happen to her this week. A man actually took her phone out of her hand and tried to find pictures of her to send to himself. That happened this week. Revenge porn, stalking, groping, threats, public masturbation, avoidance to inform, commodification, manipulation, upskirt photos. And then we have removal of autonomy. We have is the next level. So this is dosing, molestation, statutory rape, safe word violation, condom removal, sexual coercion. And then at the very base of the pyramid is explicit violence. This is rape, incest, murder, and battery. So, and then I have on the right hand of the pyramid, it is a curly bracket. I googled the actual name of this. And that shows that it's dehumanization that fuels the entire thing. So this is happening all around us. And when we think that rape and incest, murder and battery have nothing to do with boys will be boys, have nothing to do with locker room talk and rape jokes, it's not true. They are connected events and they fuel each other. They normalize each other.
Grace, can I just stop you right there? I think
Mm-hmm.
that it bears saying that it's almost as if people will push the envelope to what we allow as a society.
Mm-hmm.
If it's
Yes.
totally abhorrent, like for them to make a rape joke and they know that like it will be totally intolerated, then they will kind of check that and it's it what I'm trying to say is just that people people will just push as far as they can with what society deems acceptable. And so if more people are like, that's unacceptable, then I think it pushes other people into let them go into the dark corners of society. That's fine. And hopefully they'll find the mercy of God there and change. But we have to, like we talked about, these are dark things, and the way to expel the darkness is to shine brighter. And I think we have to maneuver in society with more integrity.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, not worry so much about people's feelings and have quick things to say to where it checks them in such a way that they would think twice about bringing that up. And if more and more people had the courage to do that, then that very foundational layer of the pyramid, I think it just gets it shrinks the issue.
Yes.
It doesn't metastasize as quickly, I guess.
Yes. And I just want to talk about my experience just a few days ago of telling the guy that was an insensitive thing to say. And his response was, or maybe you're just being too sensitive. This is like the go to common response for all abusers, right? To minimize and to deflect. And to say, like, this is a phrase in my generation, they say, it's not that deep. It's not that deep. Have you guys heard this or heard your kids say this?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's like amongst Gen Z, like everything is cringe. You have to be so coy, you have to be so cool. Like you can't it's cringe to like feel deeply or think deeply. And this is so dangerous. It is so easy to say, maybe you're being too sensitive for bringing it up. That is this man's way of saying, my rape joke doesn't contribute to rape culture. It does. It is that deep, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and for him to say, it is just so common for men to throw women's emotions back at them. It's so
It's shift
common.
shaming. Shift shaming is what I call it.
Oh, that's a
Mhm.
good
Mhm.
phrase. Yes, right?
So one thing that we do know, however, is like that this is all really, really good. I'm just thinking a lot of the control issues and if, you know, the abuse is happening and the core situation is control, then the shaming part of it contributes even more. So I
Mhm.
guess my question is then, because I want to shame people and be like, how dare you? Like, that's disgusting. Why would you bring this up? And have them feel that like ick for themselves to change. But I think
Yes.
that that might just compound their desire to control.
It does. I actually
Okay, so
talk about
what's
this in my presentation.
okay, I
So
yeah,
let me finish this part, but
let's
you're getting at the exact root of it. It absolutely does. Right? And I want
mhm,
to say there's a difference, and I address this, but there's a difference between guilt and shame, and there's a
mhm,
difference between ostracization and shame, right?
mhm,
So when we accept that abuse is a spectrum, or in this case, a pyramid, the way I have it, and that it's not binary, good people, good, bad people, we can save the person while still ostracizing the behavior,
mhm,
right? We can still love the person. I think this guy that said this rape joke, I don't know for sure if he's an abuser or not, but I do know that there's a huge movement, I'll just say it publicly, the red pill movement, that is victimizing men and getting them to accept and normalize this kind of behavior. All of our boys are not bad people. They're not bad people. They are being fed these lies. The lies can be ostracized without shaming the person, right? So, yeah, I talk about this. But if we just say that there are just bad men out there, and then we say bad men do da 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 da, and then da 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 is the list. and then, um, and then we associate this person does these things, they think I'm bad. Shame is a cage that you can't get out of. It's like they're gridlocked. There's no hope for them.
mhm.
People who feel that way just lash out. So you're right. It does fuel it.
And I think that they need hope for themselves. Like this was learned and perhaps perpetuated on them. And at the end of the day, one way to look at people that you need to have an increase of compassion for, or at least to crack open the door for compassion, is to imagine them as children, because we were all children at one point. And at some point, this was learned behavior perpetuated on them. And we do want to live in a society where people can change. And I do believe in that. I do. And I've seen it. And I'm the first one to say that how grateful I am for that, that people
Mhm.
can change. But then the question, it begs the question, how do we get them to change while still protecting the most vulnerable and not fueling the shame that further locks them in a cage and makes them want to control and then perpetuate
Yes.
the abuse?
Yes. So this is a perfect lead into my next graph, which we call the life culture graph. So in Big Ocean Women, we have a tenet about life culture. It's a Carol, do you want to talk about that really quickly?
Sure, just that it spawned from the pro-life movement, and the pro-life movement is the exact same thing that you are articulating with the culture of commodification or abuse, that we have to get kind of at the core of where things come from. And life culture is a culture that you cultivate. I think it also sparked from one of our models. It's called the three environments. That the first environment is life within the womb, and then life in the home, and then everything else that ripples from that. And so, if we want to protect, human life, that there's a variety of different ways that interlock, and it's an entire ecosystem that feeds into life. So, for example, if you want to keep women from aborting their babies, we need to look at the fundamental reasons of why they would choose that, why they feel like their life is so, why they're so stuck in scarcity mindset, where the thought of giving life to a child would end their own. So we have to kind of backtrack and ask those, underlying questions. So that's what life culture is.
Yes. So my life culture graph is the exact same thing. It's the backtracking, it's the preventative work, and it really goes hand in hand with pro-lifism. And it starts with empowerment. It starts with the empowerment of all people. The rape culture graph was a pyramid where the point was at the bottom and the biggest part was at the top. So now life culture is flipped over. So this base level is empowerment. So it starts with service and chivalry and making sure that your friends get home safe. It starts with validation and human stories and a growth mindset. It starts with open conversations, exposure, community support, and outside source mentorship. And then we move into dignity. Dignity is the next level. And this looks like consent, agency, a sense of identity, respect for fertility, good intentions, confidence and freedom, progression in relationships. And then the next level is connection. And this looks like patience, loyalty, trust, physical touch, dating, commitment, even romance, and selflessness. And then the very top is the life abundance. So this is conscious conception of children and intimate love and also pleasure, which sex can offer. So this is specifically referring to sexuality and connections, but really this could go for anything. This is the map, although the top might say something different. This is the map for empowerment of all people in every context. So this comes with when we're talking about pro-lifism, when we're talking about the praying of our boys from the red pill movement, which we talked about in another podcast episode. And the curly brackets here are respect and security. So if rape culture is the definition of a lack of security, then life culture is the definition of respect and security, which is our goal. That's what we're trying to create. When people feel safe and secure, they speak up when there's weird stuff going on before the abuse even happens. When people feel safe and secure, they do not tunnel down into abusive behaviors in the first place. So this is what our families can look like. And so the title of this slide is Yes, All Men and All Women. We all have a responsibility to take accountability for what we've done to contribute to rape culture, and we all have a responsibility to work towards life culture best we can every single day. Every single day. There's a really
I love
great
that. I love
quote.
that you're sharing the responsibility for all of us, because I think some people
Yes.
just wash their hands of it, and they're like, well, it doesn't apply to me. But
Uh,
everything we do,
it
this is
does.
applicable. Mm-hmm.
As a survivor, how I hear my friends and family talk about the Epstein case or talk about the justification of pedophilia in our culture today, I take note. You're a safe person, you're not a safe person. Like, it matters. How you talk about these things matter, you know? So there's a really great author who says, I'm not interested in a world where men want to abuse but resist because they've been shamed. I'm interested in a world where men are raised from birth with such an unshakable understanding of women as living human beings that they're incapable of being aroused by their exploitation. So was it Shannon that, or maybe Caroline, that talked about like anybody who's aroused by child pornography, that's not okay. It's not
Mm-hmm.
okay to be aroused by the exploitation of women in general.
Yeah, like you have to check into that. Like if that's
Yes.
part of your life, you need to pause and get help.
Yes.
Pause and get help. Go tell somebody, someone that will show you unconditional love and support, and that will help walk you through your own healing, but you need help.
Mm-hmm.
You can't keep that thing hidden, you know? And I'm sure that there are people in the world that are willing to work this through with you, professionals and hopefully someone close that you can disclose to, but you need to get help.
And it's possible. Healing is
Mm-hmm.
possible for everybody. For
Yeah.
everybody on the spectrum, to abusers to victims, healing is possible.
Mm-hmm.
So as you guys know now, that my abuse specifically had to do with child pornography, the creation of child pornography. over the last several years, I've actually worked with a company that helps people recover from pornography addictions. And so this is what I've kind of chosen to pour myself into for the time being. And working with this company, I've worked with hundreds of men who were consuming the very material that abused me. We call it CSAM, child sexual abuse material, because I don't like to call it pornography. I don't think they're the same thing. But in a lot of definitions, they are. And I have seen hundreds of times that men, but also women who have felt stuck by the grips of pornography have been able to work through their addictions. And it's not through shaming. It's not through even like the apps where you have like filters that block you from seeing things. That's just like the person that I used to work for. She uses this analogy of like it's like a beach ball being pushed underwater. That's what shame does. You just push it, push it, push it, push it, avoid, avoid, avoid. At some point it's going to come bursting up. And it's going to look like lashing out, looking for control, right? Or binging porn or whatever it is. It is possible to work through pornography addictions or the urges to view child pornography or whatever when we learn to accept ourselves. It's the exact same process that I talked about at the beginning of this episode of accepting my healing journey. It comes through acceptance. It comes through, in my opinion, a level of like submission to your higher power. And it comes through having so much grace for yourself and every day just being a little bit better and being present with your body. The only reason that my memories finally came up into my body is because I've done 10 years of therapy work. I'm so the greatest privilege I've ever been given is that my parents got me into therapy so early. So I've learned to be present with my body. Okay, what does this feel like? What color could this be? You learn to identify your emotions, what sensation they bring in your body. That's how somebody works through trauma. It's also how somebody works through any sort of addiction. So, actually, let's just jump into this. Okay, so what is trauma? Let me pull up my notes here. Okay, so um, when a traumatic event occurs, it actually physically alters our brain. So the prefrontal cortex physically shrinks. And this is our center for decision making and emotional regulation. And the hippocampus shrinks. This is where we store memories. So, this is one of the reasons why it's really common for memory blockages and disassociation to happen. And the amygdala becomes hyperactive. This is our fight or flight response. So, it's true when people say like trauma is just in your head. I mean, your brain is in your head, so I guess that's true, but it physically affects your brain. And for a long time, people thought that if it physically alters your brain, that means you're just kind of stuck like this. And there's been a lot of people suffering with PTSD that hold this belief. But through many studies, one specifically done in 2018 that I can link in the show notes, shows that connection via healthy relationships is the number one most effective tool in healing the actual biomarkers of trauma. So people who have strong connections, strong families, strong friendships can physically alter their brain. This is so cool to me. I get so excited talking about this. Okay. So that's why we posit that strong families are the number one kind of avenue, this vehicle for healing. So, going back to shame, this is something that abusers and victims have in common. Brené Brown, if you guys are familiar with Brené Brown, she's a very famous shame researcher. She says, I define shame as the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. Something we've experienced, done, or failed to do makes us unworthy of connection. Unworthy of connection. That's the base of shame. She goes on to say, I don't believe shame is helpful or productive. In fact, I think shame is much more likely to be the source of destructive, hurtful behavior than the solution or cure. I think the fear of disconnection can make us dangerous. I've created what the shame spiral is in a graphic here. So it starts with the belief that we are flawed. So there's a difference between shame and guilt. Brené Brown talks about this. Guilt is when you think, I've done something bad, I can do better. Shame is, I am a bad person. And it's a cage. It makes you stuck. So it starts with the belief that we're flawed, and then you spiral into avoidance and isolation, right? So that's for moms listening, when you see your kids starting to isolate and avoid topics, that should be a red flag right in our brains right there. The avoidance and isolation is like the beach ball being pushed under the water. You will lash out to gain control every single time. And this perpetuates the disconnection. So this has been studied widely. This is just a human phenomenon. So shame is not healthy for anybody, not for abusers, not for survivors, not for anybody who's trying to be a healed person in between. When we tackle shame, which is done through, let's see, do I talk about this? It's done through exposure and storytelling. We talk about how sunlight is the best disinfectant. It's the same thing. Sharing your story is how you combat shame. That's how you reverse this cycle downward for everybody. Do you guys have any thoughts on that? Did I address the question okay there?
I think this is good stuff.
Okay. All right.
So, as a mom, I'm trying to think, what ways are we building our culture at home that uses, let's say, productive guilt as opposed to shame? So, how are we speaking to our children? How are we teaching them and educating them and showing up in their lives so that we can be better examples of, making pivots and recognizing areas, where you failed, but you can change, and showing like transformational change in yourself so that they can see that as a model. And then I mean, as you're talking, I'm thinking, oh, I did this and I projected shame on this one child in this experience. Oh, I have done this before. So I mean, we're not perfect by any means, and we're failing in many regards as parents, but we're also, you know if we shame ourselves, then we can't change and do better as well in how we're talking about shame, and fixing areas where we may have done that, as we're educating our children.
I think start off by the simple definition that Grace gave, what the difference is between shame and guilt, so that as they're experiencing when they make mistakes or when they recognize we make mistakes as parents, that they can understand the difference. I think that would be healthy for them to recognize that.
Yeah, and I think, like, going along with that too is like when we make mistakes, that we turn to them and acknowledge it, and then it gives opportunity for connection there through forgiveness, and like, hey, I may have goofed with this thing. Let's do a let's redo this, and have a do-over, and talk about this, and then build that connection. And I think the family unit is a perfect vehicle to do that, and to change habits of avoidance and isolation and hiding behavior and not talking. So yeah, I think, Shannon, just like you said, talking about it from the very beginning, and just giving a voice, giving space to have those conversations as a family is a good start.
Thank you, ladies, so much for your stories, for your wisdom. Grace, is there anything that you needed to add that you felt like you haven't had a chance to get to?
There is actually. There is one more little facet of this that I want to talk about that I'm seeing, and we can choose to edit this out maybe, but it's just something that has been on my heart that I want to add. So I'll share this in the slides as well, but another facet of abuse that I think is not often talked about is the lasting effects on your body. So we talked about how chronic illness is a huge thing. Another big one in Utah, which is where Big Ocean Women is based, is eating disorders. Eating disorders are also fueled by shame, just like any other addiction. And I don't know if you ladies know this, but Utah actually has the highest density percentage of eating disorders in the nation. Yeah, it's a huge deal. And I think it is no coincidence that there's also, like Carolina talked about, it's a hub for pedophilia, for all sorts of ritual abuse, which we talked about in our CSW presentation, and eating disorders. I also, so in Big Ocean, we believe in the three environments, right? So the womb, the family, and the world. And I think that a new attack on the womb and women in general is attacking our bodies through malnutrition. So I think that it is no coincidence that as we see many people justifying the Epstein files and like this lack of accountability, there's also this huge rise in a body trend that people are calling like heroin chic. I don't know if you guys remember that phrase from the 90s. It's this very, very skinny trend. So with was it the Oscars? I have a picture that you guys will see on the slides later, I guess. But I just seeing like the images of Hollywood nowadays. It is so common for people. You're seeing ribs and bones are showing. They're so, so skinny. Have you guys seen this? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, it's like the Ozempic
Yes. Yeah.
trend.
Ozempic. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes. So I say that I genuinely believe that the current rise of overusing Ozempic and similar weight loss drugs is directly related to the current justification of pedophilia. And I know they sound disconnected, but I think that diet culture and the ultra skinny heroin chic is back in style, and the Kardashian curvy is like out, right? Like nobody wants to be Kardashian curvy anymore. And the fact that bodies are a trend, I think is really disturbing as it is, but just addressing it anyway. In the Epstein files, we found out that the CEO of Victoria's Secret and Pink, Les Wexner, was heavily involved with the pedophilia. And I'm not shocked about this at all. I am saddened because when I think about my childhood, I think about going to the mall, I think about these stores, and it was like peak girlhood experience. And to learn that this was grooming of young women is sad, I think, for a lot of women in my generation. So, like, and it just makes sense because when we think of Victoria's Secret models, these are like small, hairless, like malnourished women that look like children, right? Like, that's the beauty standard that's being pushed on us. So, I mean, in Big Ocean Women, we're always talking about social engineering from elites, typically with the UN, but the elite sphere, top down, social engineering. So I see that the elite have socially engineered women through sexual liberation of the 70s to groom children to express their sexuality as core, like quote unquote, girlhood experiences, and to groom women to look like children. Additionally, the malnourished women, when you're malnourished, and so I struggled with an eating disorder in college, which is also really common for abuse survivors, because I'm grasping for control the same way we all are with shame. So there's your critical thinking skills drop. Like it is, the brain fog is so real. You're less likely to resist abuse if you're too weak to do so. Additionally, malnourished women are less likely to give birth and raise healthy children. And that's what's happening, right? So, I mean, yeah, this really could be like a whole different podcast episode about the attack on the womb from the elite. But I see this as another facet of that. So I'm a curvy woman, and as a curvy woman with a history of bulimia, I'm beginning to understand that accepting my body as a gift and working to always become stronger, not necessarily thinner, is a bold act of resistance against abusive systems. So, kind of to like end this tangent, I just think it's important that women lift heavy, eat as many calories as your body needs to be healthy and to sustain your strength. And the most important thing is just embrace your body as it is. I also believe in body neutrality rather than body positivity, where like my body's just a vessel to do whatever I want to do. And also, my body's the least interesting thing about me. Like, you know, like it's just a vessel. And the beauty industry, which is $1 billion industry, it profits off of our insecurity. And that is so easily um, targeted to create women who are less capable of standing up against abuse. So I see these
I
as
love that, Grace.
two
I
sides
love
of the same
that.
coin. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Strong women,
Thank you.
healed women can resist abuse systems.
Mhm.
And
We're
recognize
scary to
them.
abuse
Recognize
systems.
them.
Hmm. Yeah, recognize them. You're right. Yeah, we're terrifying
Mhm.
to them, which is important.
I love that. I love that, Grace.
Carol, did you have anything else you wanted to say today?
No, I'm just so grateful for this conversation. I agree that we should have another episode to
Agreed.
talk about this and explore, beauty standards and the infantilization of femininity, of of trying to corrupt our ideas around, what women should look like, and that it's pushing us toward looking like children. That's so warped.
It's
I
true
think
though,
that's
right?
really, it's
You
so
see it.
It
true.
is.
Yeah.
Yes.
Everyone knows it and sees it. We just haven't quite pinpointed that and put language to it. So I'm grateful that you added that last bit. That was a big, powerful piece. Yeah, I was put on this earth to protect children, just at the end of the day. And I want to wake up as many women around the world to do the same. I know that as we do so, we will be doing God's will. God loves children. Our Creator has a special place for the most vulnerable and these special children who are looking to us for protection and guidance. And I'll do anything within my power to grow that. And I know that that's the ultimate litmus test, is how we treat children. And I hope that we can just wake up as many people to not worry about other adults' feelings, but that we can listen to children.
Thank you, Carol and Grace, for both sharing your wisdom and your insights. I am so grateful to share global sisterhood with you. For our listeners today, as we close, I know that the weight of this conversation is very real. And if there's so many takeaways today, to be honest with you, but if there's one thing that I would like you to remember, is that darkness does not get the final word. It does not. Real change doesn't always start in courtrooms, rarely starts in headlines. It starts in everyday decisions, in how we treat people, how we speak up, how we create safe and honest space in our homes and our communities. So wherever you are listening to this, take that with you. You have more influence than you think. The way that you show up matters, and the way that you and the culture that you choose to create matters. So thank you for being a part of this, and we look forward to being with you next time. Thank you, ladies. Have a nice day.
Thank you. You too.
Bye-bye.